If I'm scrolling through social media and I'm just looking for that cheap dopamine hit because I'm programmed to be that way, and it's just subconscious, unconscious, right, what do I do with my time? I've got 5 seconds spare, or if my app and I start scrolling, that's just dopamine driving our behaviours. Welcome to the Delta Pod. This is an episode which is following on from the previous one where we were talking about creativity versus consumption. That ratio being key because the hypothesis is that creativity helps us find fulfillment. That if we're being creative, we are going to be slightly more, I believe, or I see myself, when we're slightly more fulfilled. But a core part here is the consumption side of things, which in the last episode, we focused mainly on the ratio between the two, creativity versus consumption. Where's the correct balance? Should we be creating more or consuming more, etc., etc.? In this episode, what I want to talk about is we are what we consume. So our ability to create is directly linked to what we allow ourselves to consume. So there's a relationship. We need creativity, but we also need to consume stuff. For me, a very practical way of looking at this is I'm currently doing a thing called the 75 Hard Challenge, which is Andy Frisella's program where you basically need to be a savage and employ some really strong routines for 75 days. You miss a day or you miss one thing on one day, go back to the beginning, start at zero, start your 75 days again. I'm 15 days in, doing well. And I think I've done diets and eating plans before. I think what I'm finding this time around is being very strict with sticking to it because I don't want to miss one thing, is having massive results. I'm being very clear with myself that the diet plan or the way I plan to eat for these 75 days, I can't break that. And so what I'm consuming, the things I'm consuming are actually having a great benefit. I'm seeing the results of the quality of the things I'm consuming and the correct amount of things I'm consuming having a benefit in my life, or having a benefit in my physique, in how I feel, and there's a consistency to that as well. So kind of the whole we are what we eat, but actually when it comes to creativity, we are what we consume. And if we look at the various ways we consume, like everything you put through your eyes, the eyes are a window to your soul, the things you listen to, the people and the conversations you have, the books you read or the books you don't read, the newspapers you read, all of it. I would go as far as saying even if you working or live in big cities, the amount of ads you get bombarded with, all of that is stuff you're consuming. So it's an interesting one. How do you manage what you're consuming to make sure it's feeding your creativity how you want it, so you can create the way you want to create. So if you want to be super creative, then you probably need to be thinking about what am I consuming and how much of it am I consuming. And it's a bit of a model I want to kind of propose for this as well. And I've stolen it a little bit. And it's from a concept, hopefully we're all aware of something called big data. I think it was in the news, and it was a very topical word a few years ago. There's data and then there's big data. And the way you differentiate the two is using a model called the 4V's. Now the 4V's are variety, velocity, and volume. Now if we look at volume first, volume is how much stuff are we consuming? So am I consuming loads and doing very little creativity, and am I happy with that? So the volume side of these 4V's really relates to the ratio we were talking about in the last podcast. Variety, how many different types of data or how many different types of things am I consuming? And it's an interesting one here. Am I actively, when I'm consuming stuff, am I listening, reading things I like? Am I staying in my echo chamber, or am I trying to push out my echo chamber? Am I trying to bring divergent thought and divergent thinking into the things I'm consuming? And I think that might be a key point when it comes to creativity, and creativity being the creation of novel things. So if I just listen to the same things and read the same books all the time, then I'm likely to create the same stuff, right? So bringing a bit of divergence into what I'm consuming through variety is key. And then velocity, which in the big data world is how fast is data coming into the system. And if you take Facebook as an example, they'll be having a big data operation, and they'll be streaming data. So data is flying into their systems as a constant stream all the time, like probably petabytes and petabytes of data. For us, for this model, I think it's more around velocity is, are you allowing yourself to absorb what you're consuming? So am I reading a book? Am I skim reading it? I'm like, oh, all right, smashed it, done a book in 2 days, great. Or am I actually, same book, taking a week, 2 weeks to read it, but journaling about it, noting it down, tabbing pages, studying it, right? So that's the difference. I've consumed the book, but in two very different ways. One, I perhaps have studied it and allowed myself to absorb it in a slightly slower fashion versus a higher velocity fashion where I might be just skim reading it and trying to get through it. But I would add a fourth one, and this is one as I was kind of in the blog, as I was writing this out, I was thinking actually a really important V in all of this is value. If I'm doing the volume right, I'm getting lots of stuff in. I'm increasing how much I'm consuming, and I'm making sure I'm spending my time on it. I'm taking the correct velocity I'm applying to ensure I consume things correctly, and I'm getting a good variety of different sources, a good variety of different people I'm talking to. That's all well and good, but value, I would say, is the key test here, right? Is what I'm consuming adding value to my life? Or is it detracting from my life? And this is the key test, right? This is why we need to look at our ratio. Are we creating or consuming? If I'm scrolling through social media and I'm just looking for that cheap dopamine hit because I'm programmed to be that way, and it's just subconscious, unconscious, right? What do I do with my time? I've got 5 seconds spare. I open my app and I start scrolling. That's just dopamine driving our behaviours. Or am I using social media to support friends, catch up with friends, do research? Like what I love trying to do on social media, and currently I don't have social media on my phone, but when I was on social media, I loved trying to hack the algorithm so it would only give me certain things, so give me positive stuff. So when I go into like the discovery page on any of these apps, what's it showing me? And that's a very good window into what it is you're consuming, because it will show you things that what you've been consuming. So is it showing you stuff which is going to offer you value, or is it showing you stuff just like pointless memes and random just noise, and make the algorithm work for you rather than you working for the algorithm? So we now have 4V's. 4V's to test out how we consume, make sure what we're consuming is helping us to create the stuff we want to create, whatever it is you want to create, and in the correct ratio, that how much you want to create. So because creativity will be driven by what you consume. And I suppose within that you could spend a bit of time thinking about, well, especially around the variety of things, do I always hang out with the same people, and can I go out and start talking to different people and go networking or join a different sports club and all that kind of stuff, right? The people in our lives are a core element of the variety of things we consume. So the 4V's are volume, variety, velocity, and value. Use that, think about it. How do I use those 4V's to test out and design what I'm consuming so I can go and create however I need to create? My kind of parting question to you would be, how are you ensuring that what you are consuming is adding value to your life? And so, yes, go use the whole model, but really focus in on how am I getting value from this? And if you haven't heard of the value equation is an interesting one. I use it in my coaching work whenever I start coaching. Value equation is costs minus the benefit equals value. So whatever's remaining after that equation is the value. So if the cost outweighs the benefit, then there's no value. But if the benefit outweighs the cost, then there's a level of value. If I'm wasting 10 minutes scrolling, what the cost is 10 minutes of my life, to what benefit? So what's the value? Right? So that's how you could use it, how you could think about things. The other point here is joy. There is a space for dopamine. There is a space for happiness. I would say they go a long way to helping you be creative. So allow that, temper all this with, am I happy? Is there joy in what I'm doing? But be very aware that the dopamine hit will be driving your behaviours, okay? So do I enjoy reading this book? Well, I might not always enjoy reading. It might be really hard going. It might be a really academic book. But I know that the benefit or the value is I'm going to see the value out of it once I've been through it and I've absorbed it. Sometimes there might be a little bit of mind over matter, pursuing things which are a little bit uncomfortable because there's strategic joy at the end. So I hope that all makes sense. it was something which was kind of on my mind. I hadn't really articulated that well. And so I didn't really talk about it in the previous podcast, but I wanted to articulate it here because we can't talk about creativity versus consumption without acknowledging that we are what we consume. So thank you very much. Please, if you've enjoyed this, tell your mates, go and share it with them. And I'd love to hear your responses to that question. How are you focusing on consuming things that bring value to your life? All the best.